Right. So our friend David was asking about how the Rambam holds that it seems that even in Galus that there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. So I don't mean to advise you anything. I just want to clarify. It's not the Rambam, it's the Ramban, because that's the famous machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban, that in the list of the Taryag mitzvahs, the Rambam does not list neither Yishuv Eretz Yisrael nor Kibush Eretz Yisrael as one of the Taryag mitzvahs, as one of the 613 commandments, neither the commandment to conquer Eretz Yisrael nor the mitzvah to settle in or dwell in the Holy Land. So Maimonides, the Rambam does not have it. The Ramban, Nachmanides, in his comments on the Sefer Mitzvos, he says that the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael should be considered one of the 613 mitzvahs. And his argument is that it's something that applies at all times. L'doros, for future generations. The meaning of why he mentions that is because the Rambam lists his shoroshim, his roots, as to which commands in the Torah are considered to be the 613 mitzvahs. Meaning we know from the Gemara in Makos that there are 613 mitzvahs, 365 negative commandments, los aseh, and 248 positive mitzvos aseh, positive commandments. But the Gemara doesn't tell us what they are, so the various Rishonim try to figure out which are the 613 commandments. And the most famous would be the Rambam, although there's others, there's the Smak and the Smak and so forth. And the Ramban is arguing with the Rambam in accordance with the Rambam's teachings, meaning one of the examples that the Rambam gives, that Maimonides gives, as to why something would be considered a mitzvah and why it would not be considered a mitzvah, is that if a commandment applies for future generations, then it is one of the 613 mitzvahs, as opposed to if it's just a one-time thing. An example of a one-time thing would be the copper snake that we read about a few weeks ago in Parshas Chukas. Hashem commanded Moshe to make a copper snake and put it up on the pole, and that was a one-time thing. That's not considered one of the 613 mitzvos because it's a one-time commandment that does not apply for future generations. So the question here is, does the mitzvah of Kibush Eretz Yisrael, which seems to be one and the same with the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah of conquering the Holy Land, which seems to be one and the same with the mitzvah of dwelling in the Holy Land, is that a one-time mitzvah, meaning the time of Joshua, the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, that the Klal Yisrael was commanded to conquer Eretz Yisrael, to make kibush, and once that was completed, that's the end, and it's no longer a commandment. It was just, and once it's done, it's done. Meaning, once they made the kibush, once they made the conquest of the land, it was eternally the Holy Land. It ceased to be the land of Canaan and became the land of Israel, and for all eternity. So it seems like the Rambam's understanding as to why he would not list as one of the 613 mitzvos is because it was something that had to be done one time, the time of Joshua, and then that's it. And then it's done. It doesn't have to be done again. As opposed to Ramban's understanding, is that the conquest is continual, meaning that the mitzvah of Kibush Eretz Yisrael is one and the same with the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And so by dwelling in the Holy Land, one continues the mitzvah of conquering the Holy Land. Or the purpose of the conquest is the Yishuv, is the dwelling, is the residence. And so the Ramban there, he says that it is a mitzvah noheg l'doros. It is a mitzvah that is established for future generations. And so therefore the Rambam should have included it in one of the 613, as opposed to seeing it as essentially a hechsher mitzvah for all the mitzvahs of Tluyas Ba'aretz. That is essentially what it would seem that the way a lot of people learn the Rambam is that he sees the conquest of Eretz Yisrael as being, and essentially also Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, as being a necessary ingredient for all of those many mitzvahs that only apply in Eretz Yisrael, which are the majority of the 613 mitzvahs only apply in Eretz Yisrael. And so therefore, like we know, the Chavetz Chaim had the Sefer Mitzvahs HaKotzer. He had the abbreviated book of mitzvahs because he talked about which mitzvahs apply outside of Eretz Yisrael today, which are a little over 200. It's less than 300 of the mitzvahs out of the 613 that we are able to do outside the Holy Land. And being that in order to do, and a lot of those that are in Eretz Yisrael are only in the Beis Hamikdash, only in the temple. But the point that I'm saying is that so the Rambam would see Yishuv Eretz Yisrael not as a mitzvah in itself, but an extra mitzvah. I was still recording, but as something that is required in order to do all of those other mitzvahs that are the mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael. So these Pennsylvania roads, at least what is going on? What did I just do? At least the taxpayer money is going into my pocket instead of these roads, right? So anyway, let's see, this thing are we still recording? Yeah. Well, anyway, it's dark anyway, so I can keep it down here. So the Rambam would see Yishuv Eretz Yisrael as a prerequisite for the mitzvahs at Tluyas Ba'aretz, for the land-based agricultural mitzvahs and all the other mitzvahs and the Beis Hamikdash mitzvahs and so forth. Whereas the Ramban, Nachmanides, he argues with the Rambam and says that no, we still have a mitzvah in and of itself of Kibush Eretz Yisrael, because the Kibush that happened after the Golus Bavel shows that it's something that's noig with l'daris, that the fact that there was a new conquest after the exile in Babylonia and the temple was rebuilt and so forth, that was excuse me, and it's a machlokus in the Gemara about this, not only about that, but about kibush of lands around Eretz Yisrael and incorporating them into Eretz Yisrael, as happened at the time of King David. So that is what the Ramban is saying when he says that it's a mitzvah noeg l'doros, that the conquest is something that happened not only one time in the generation of Joshua, but in the future generations as well, and so therefore it would be included as one of the 613, whereas the Rambam Maimonides does not include it. With that being said, the Ramban then goes and says, Afilu bisman hagalos, even in the time of the exile, we fulfill this mitzvah through Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, meaning through dwelling in the Holy Land, we fulfill the mitzvah, meaning we cannot do the mitzvah of kibush. We cannot conquer land because we don't have a proper army and all of these things. So the Ramban, you have to be medayek in the Ramban, and even in Nachmanides, where he talks about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, he makes a distinction that one does not do the military conquest in the time of Golus, but rather one would only fulfill that mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael of Kibush Eretz Yisrael through Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, meaning that by virtue of the fact that we are living in Golus under a foreign power, one still is fulfilling that mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, which is a chelik of the mitzvah of Kibush Eretz Yisrael, and perhaps connected in a certain way. It combines both the Rambam and the Ramban's idea that yes, that initial kibush was the hechsher to the future Yishuv, and that Yishuv itself is a chelik of that mitzvah of kibush, and so therefore now in Golus, because Eretz Yisrael maintains its kedusha, although again it's a machlokes in the Gemara, but the way that we generally paskin would be that it does maintain its kedusha, except certain inyanim are only noeg when the yovel is noeg, when Rov Klal Yisrael is living in Eretz Yisrael, and it's a whole question about the significance of that in halacha, because as it is right now, a lot of the mitzvos are only derabanan in Eretz Yisrael, and certain mitzvos we don't keep at all, because it's understood that it's only when the majority of the Jewish people are dwelling in the land that these mitzvos apply, which would include the whole time of the Second Temple, because the time of the Second Temple, only a small minority returned to Eretz Yisrael, and the majority remained in Babylon. So we are not. So the main thing that we don't have without the majority in Eretz Yisrael is the Yovel, is the Jubilee year, and that we observe the sabbatical year, which next year will be a sabbatical year. So we observe the sabbatical year in a in a way, but it's a rabbinical way, and that's why we can have prusbol and all these other things, because the sabbatical laws are rabbinical and not biblically binding until they're only biblically binding when the majority of the Jewish nation of the Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. So nonetheless, the Ramban recognizes that despite that, one still is doing a mitzvah by living in Eretz Yisrael, even visiting Eretz Yisrael. Like it is understood, and the Gemara talks about this, that if one walks Daled Amos in Eretz Yisrael, they fulfill a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And the story goes that I think Reb Nachman Breslover, when he got to Eretz Yisrael, after a long and arduous journey, that he visited Eretz Yisrael for a brief time, he walked Daled Amos. He said, okay, I did the tikkun, what I have to do, I'm ready to go back home. Because he was mekayim the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, and that's how he was mekayim it, and there's nothing militarily connected about it else. So, like we said, therefore, one fulfills the mitzvah by visiting. The issue is, and it is a halachic issue, is that once one goes to Eretz Yisrael, he needs a heter to leave Eretz Yisrael, according to the majority of the poskim, and that's the normative halacha. But in general, if someone their parnasa is in Chutz La'aretz or some other aspect, family or other things, we give the heter to return to Chutz La'aretz. So, that's something that has to be clear before one goes to Eretz Yisrael. But in general, it's not that difficult to have a heter. But there needs to be some kind of a decent excuse for one to leave Eretz Yisrael once one is there. But we see that Reb Nachman Breslover understood it, that Mekayim the mitzvah by walking Daled Amos, Lefi Shitas Ramban, that the Ramban holds that is how one is Mekayim the mitzvah Bisman Hazeh, not militarily, not through kibush, but through just being there and walking around. And so you walk 4 cubits, you fulfill the commandment, and that's it. So, and we know that Reb Moshe, for example, understood the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael as a mitzvah, the language he used, as a mitzvah kiyumis and not a mitzvah chiyuvis. That when one visits Eretz Yisrael or dwells in Eretz Yisrael, in Mekayim the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Similarly, we could say to, like, if one has a 4-cornered garment and he attaches tzitzis, he's Mekayim, he fulfills the mitzvah of tzitzis. But as far as it being an obligation, there's no obligation according to Reb Moshe. Bisman Hazeh, Reb Moshe's understanding, it would seem, and it seems to be somewhat based on this Ramban, that he talks about this idea of filu b'zman hagolus, that he makes a clear nafkamina between the time of geula and the time of golus, and that there is a nafkamina in the mode of the mitzvah, that it goes from a mitzvah of kibush that leads to Yishuv, and then it becomes merely a mitzvah of Yishuv. It would seem, according to Ramban, and that's certainly how Sapirov learns the Ramban. And so Reb Moshe seems to be in agreement with that by saying that it's not a mitzvah chiyuvis, but mitzvah kiyumis, that really you're not under any obligation to don a 4-cornered garment, but once one does, there's a chiyuv of tzitzis on the garment, and that one therefore fulfills the mitzvah by wearing it. Along a similar vein, maybe less so, would be the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, that one is not obligated to live in Eretz Yisrael, but when one does so, they fulfill the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. Now, a lot of discussion with many of the Achronim, how does that apply today? And it's obviously there are different opinions. The thing is that I think it was one Briskerov, maybe, he pointed out that when the Gemara says that it's better to live in Eretz Yisrael even in a city that's mostly Gentiles than to live in Chutz La'aretz, even in a city that's mostly Jews. And I believe it was Briskerov who said that the Gemara says a city that's mostly Gentiles, but doesn't say a city that's mostly heretics, and that it's an issue with now under the Zionist regime, that you'll have cities that are mostly heretics, and that, again, like we say often, that Judaism is a religion and not a race, and that when we talk about Ruba Yisrael, mostly Jews, it's talking about Jews who are faithful to the Torah. I mean, we know the Mishnah Nida talks about the Benos Tzedukim, and asked, are they acting ki Yisrael or kavasehem? And if they act ki Yisrael, then they have a din ki Yisrael. But if they act kavasehem, then they don't have a din ki Yisrael. So therefore, they're not part of the Klal Yisrael. And it would seem that if there was a city that was mostly Tzedukim in those days, Tzedukim, in different ways people say it, we would not. There would be no mitzvah to live in such a place. Adarabah would be a sin. So these are the types of things that one has to take into account. But certainly the Rambam does not count Yishuv Eretz Yisrael as one of the 613 mitzvahs, and the way that you're describing, it sounds clear that you're talking about the Ramban. And again, I don't mean to embarrass you, but it's an important discussion. We know, the other Rishonim who, there's the Megillas Esther, who is a commentary on the Ramban, and he says that, even though we can make this diuk in Lashon of the Ramban about the Filu B'Zman HaGolus, the Megillas Esther, it seems that because of the Shleish Shavuos that were Potter, even it seems like Megillas Esther also a Rishon. There's a lot to be machlokes Rishonim, that the Megillas Esther is saying that no, we don't have a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael b'zman hazeh, and certainly not the chiyuv. That's what the Tosfos talks about. That if someone lives, the Gemara on that Mishnah that you were talking about, the Mishnah says that one would be pushing, that a husband or a wife could force a divorce over this question of living in Eretz Yisrael. First of all, so then the Gemara there talks about all these different things. About someone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, it's like he has a god, and someone who lives in Chutz La'aretz, it's like he's worshiping Avodah Zarah. But like Tosfos there says that that's only when Beis HaMikdash is standing. But then the Gemara itself ends off with the sugi of the Shleish Shavuos, and there's no machlokes that the Shleish Shavuos are binding. The only machlokes is, does it apply on the individual level, on the national level? And it seems that only applies to the national level. On the individual level, that a yochid could go and move to Eretz Yisrael, but there was an opinion in Amoraim that even that the yochid is bound by the Shleish Shavuos, that the individual is bound by the 3 oaths, and therefore he's not allowed to go to Eretz Yisrael. So these are things to have in mind with all of these things, and Sof Kol Sof, the Satmar Rav lived in Eretz Yisrael, and he had a very strong connection to Eretz Yisrael, and Lubavitcher Rebbe never went to Eretz Yisrael, and Rav Soloveitchik visited Eretz Yisrael before the Medina, but never once the Medina was miyasid. They wanted to make him a Rav Rashi, and he said no, there's no such Inyan. His mishpacha to be Rav Rashi, but he did want to be the Rav Ha'ir of Tel Aviv, but they weren't offering him that. They offered him to be the chief rabbi, not to be the chief rabbi of the whole country, and not the chief rabbi of the city. And he said, my Zaydas, they were the chief rabbi of the town of Brisk, but not of the whole kingdom of Lithuania or whatever it was, at the time when they were there. And so that's why the story goes that he turned down being the chief rabbi of the country, but he wanted very much to be the chief rabbi of the city of Tel Aviv. But again, like I said, it was not offered to him. So excuse me. Oy. So that's the story I've rambled on long enough. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you later.